My husband invited his whole family to live in our house without my knowledge. At first I was silent, but after this incident I could not stand it. I've been married to my husband for 7 years now. Our house isn't huge, just a modest 3-bedroom place we bought after saving up for a while. Things between us were fine, mostly, except for one constant thorn in my side: his parents. They never liked me. From the day we met, his mom would give me these cold stares, and his dad barely spoke to me unless it was to criticize something I'd done. I tried to brush it off over the years, figuring it was their problem, not mine. My husband knew how I felt, but he always said they'd come around eventually. I didn't believe him, but I let it go. Then, about 6 months ago, everything changed. I came home from work one evening, tired after a long shift, and found suitcases in the living room. Not just a couple, but enough to fill half the space. His parents were there, unpacking like they owned the place. My husband was in the kitchen, casually making coffee, acting like nothing was wrong. I asked him what was going on, and he said he'd invited his parents to live with us. No discussion, no heads up, just decided it on his own. Apparently, they'd hit some financial trouble and couldn't keep their apartment anymore. He thought it was the right thing to do. I stood there stunned. 7 years of marriage, and he didn't think to ask me about something this big. The house was ours, mine as much as his, but suddenly it felt like I didn't even belong in it. His mom was already rearranging the furniture, and his dad was grumbling about how the TV wasn't set up right. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just went to our bedroom, shut the door, and sat on the bed, trying to process it. My husband didn't follow me or check on me. He stayed out there, chatting with them like it was a normal day. That night I barely slept. The walls in our house aren't thick, and I could hear his parents moving around, talking loudly, acting like they'd always lived there. I kept thinking about how this was my space, my home, and now it was theirs too. I didn't say anything to my husband about it then. I figured I'd give it a few days, see if I could adjust. But deep down, I knew this was going to be a problem. His parents had never respected me, and now they were in my house, every single day. It was only a matter of time before things got worse. The first few weeks with his parents living in our house were rough. I tried to keep my routine normal, go to work, come home, cook dinner, but everything felt off. His mom took over the kitchen like it was her domain. She'd rearrange the cabinets, throw out spices she didn't like, and cook meals without asking if I wanted anything. If I tried to make something for myself, she'd hover, making comments about how I didn't season things right. His dad wasn't any better. He'd sit in the living room all day, watching TV at full volume, and if I asked him to turn it down, he'd grunt and ignore me. My husband didn't seem to notice how uncomfortable I was. He'd come home from work, talk to his parents, and act like this was all fine. I'd catch him laughing with them while I sat in the bedroom, trying to escape the noise. I started staying late at work just to avoid being there. The house didn't feel like mine anymore. Every corner had their stuff: his mom's old quilts on the couch, his dad's tools scattered in the garage. They even took the spare bedroom and turned it into their space, leaving no room for anything else. I kept quiet at first. I didn't want to start a fight with my husband, not when he seemed so set on this. But the resentment was building. I'd lie awake at night, listening to his dad snoring through the wall, and think about how I never signed up for this. His parents didn't just live with us, they acted like they owned us. They'd tell my husband what to buy at the store, what to fix around the house, and he'd do it without even checking with me. It was like I'd become invisible in my own marriage. One day, about a month in, I found his mom going through my desk in the bedroom. She said she was organizing, and didn't see why I'd care. That was the first time I snapped. I told her to get out of my stuff and that this was still my house. She looked at me like I'd insulted her, then walked off to complain to my husband. He came in later and said I didn't need to be so harsh. Harsh? I wanted to tell him how I really felt, that this whole situation was unfair, that he'd blindsided me, but I didn't. I just nodded and let it drop. But inside, I was done playing nice. Things didn't get better after I caught his mom in my bedroom. If anything, they got worse. Her name's Linda, and she's always had this arrogance about her, like she knows better than everyone else and isn't shy about showing it. Pair that with her stubbornness, and it's a nightmare. She didn't just stop at organizing my desk. She started moving my things around the house, claiming her way was more practical. My books got shoved into a corner because she said they cluttered the shelves. My coffee mugs disappeared, replaced by her chipped old ones, because she insisted hers were better quality. If I tried to put anything back, she'd undo it the next day, acting like I'd never touched it. His dad, Ray, wasn't as bad, but he didn't help. He'd sit there, glued to the TV, while Linda ran the show. My husband, meanwhile, kept playing peacemaker. He'd tell me to let it go, that his mom was just trying to feel at home. I wanted to ask him whose home this was supposed to be, but I didn't. I was still holding it in, though it was getting harder every day. Linda's arrogance wasn't just in how she acted, it was in how she talked to me. She'd lecture me about cooking, cleaning, even how I folded laundry, like I was some clueless kid. And she'd never back down, no matter how wrong she was. One evening, I came home to find she'd thrown out a painting I'd hung in the hallway. It was something I'd picked up at a flea market years ago, nothing fancy, but I liked it. She said it didn't match the house and replaced it with a gaudy flower print she'd brought from their old place. I stared at the empty spot where my painting used to be, then at her smug face as she told me how much better her choice looked. I didn't argue. I just went to the garage, found my painting in the trash, and put it in the bedroom where she couldn't touch it. My husband saw the whole thing but didn't say a word. That was when I realized this wasn't temporary. Linda wasn't just staying, she was taking over, and her stubbornness meant she'd never stop unless I did something. I started counting the days until I couldn't take it anymore. The tension in the house was thick, and I knew it was only a matter of time before I hit my limit. Living with Linda and Ray started wearing me down in ways I didn't expect. It wasn't just the big stuff, like Linda throwing out my painting or rearranging my kitchen. It was the small things piling up. She'd leave dirty dishes in the sink after cooking her greasy meals, expecting me to clean them. Ray would track mud through the house from the garage and not bother wiping it up. I'd come home exhausted, and instead of relaxing, I'd spend my evenings fixing what they'd messed up. My husband didn't see it, or didn't want to. He'd sit with them, eating whatever Linda made, while I retreated to the bedroom with a sandwich. Linda's arrogance grew bolder. She started telling me how to run my life, not just the house. She'd say I worked too much, that I should cook more for my husband, that I wasn't keeping the place clean enough. Every word dripped with this smug certainty that she was right and I was failing. If I pushed back, she'd dig in with that stubbornness of hers, refusing to let it go. Once, she spent an hour explaining why her way of mopping floors was better, even after I said I didn't care. Ray would just nod along, and my husband would change the subject like it wasn't happening. I stopped trying to fight her on the little things. It wasn't worth the energy. But that didn't mean I was okay with it. I felt like a guest in my own home, tiptoeing around to avoid her lectures. My husband noticed I was quieter, but he didn't ask why. He'd talk about his day, about work, about anything but his parents. I think he knew I was unhappy, but he didn't want to deal with it. That hurt almost as much as Linda's takeover. We'd been a team for years, and now it felt like he'd picked their side without even realizing it. By the third month, I was barely holding it together. The house smelled like Linda's cooking all the time, greasy bacon and burnt onions. My stuff kept disappearing or getting moved. I found one of my sweaters in her laundry pile once, and she said she'd borrowed it because it looked warm. I didn't even bother asking for it back. I just wanted out. Not forever, not yet, but I needed a break before I lost it completely. By the fourth month, I couldn't take it anymore. The house was suffocating me. Linda's constant presence, her arrogance, her stubbornness, her endless opinions, had turned every day into a battle I didn't want to fight. Ray's messiness and my husband's silence only made it worse. I'd stopped feeling like myself. I was irritable, tired, and on edge all the time. I needed to get out, even if just for a little while. One night, lying awake while Ray's snoring echoed through the walls, I decided I had to leave for a bit. Not forever, just a weekend to clear my head. The next morning, I told my husband I wanted us to go away. Not a suggestion, a demand. I said I needed a break from the house, from everything, and he could come with me or not. He looked surprised, maybe because I hadn't pushed back this hard before. He asked why, and I didn't sugarcoat it. I told him his parents were driving me up the wall, and I couldn't keep living like this without some space. He didn't argue. I think he saw how serious I was. He agreed to a weekend trip, just the two of us, no discussion about his parents coming along. We booked a cheap hotel 2 hours away, nothing fancy, just a place to sleep and breathe. I packed a bag that Friday after work, and we left before Linda could start her usual evening routine of taking over the kitchen. Driving out of the neighborhood felt like shedding a weight. The farther we got, the easier it was to relax. My husband didn't say much on the way, but he didn't defend his parents either. For once, it was just us, no background noise of Ray's TV or Linda's lectures. The weekend wasn't perfect. We didn't talk about the situation much, just ate at a diner, walked around a park, and slept in a bed that didn't smell like bacon grease. It was quiet, and that was enough. I didn't care about fixing things right then. I just wanted to remember what it felt like to not be on edge. Sunday night came too fast, and I dreaded going back. But I figured 2 days away might give me enough strength to deal with what was waiting. I was wrong. The drive back from our weekend away was quiet. I felt a little steadier after the break, like I could handle another week or two of Linda and Ray. My husband seemed more relaxed too, though he still didn't bring up his parents. I figured we'd ease back into things, maybe even talk about setting some boundaries. That hope lasted until we pulled into the driveway. The house looked different. The front door was a new color, bright red instead of the faded blue we'd had for years. I stared at it, confused, then noticed a pile of paint cans and tools stacked by the garage. We walked inside, and the changes hit me harder. The living room walls were now a pale yellow, nothing like the beige I'd picked out when we moved in. The carpet was gone, replaced with cheap laminate flooring that clashed with everything. Linda was in the kitchen, wiping down counters that looked freshly painted, while Ray sat in his usual spot, watching TV on a newsstand I'd never seen. I dropped my bag and asked what happened. Linda turned around, all proud, and said they'd done some upgrades while we were gone. She acted like it was a gift. My husband asked how they paid for it, and Ray mumbled something about using our credit card, the one we kept for emergencies. I checked the account on my phone right then. Over $2,000 gone. Paint, flooring, tools, even a new microwave they'd installed because Linda didn't like ours. They hadn't asked, hadn't called, just went ahead and spent our money on things we didn't want. Linda started explaining how much better the house looked now, her voice full of that arrogance I'd come to hate. She said the old colors were drab and the carpet was worn out, like it was her place to decide. I couldn't speak. My weekend of calm was gone in seconds. My husband looked at me, then at his parents, and didn't say anything. Linda kept talking, stubborn as ever, insisting they'd done us a favor. I walked through the house, seeing more, new curtains in the bedroom, a shelf in the bathroom I didn't ask for. Every change was a slap in the face. This wasn't my home anymore. It was theirs, stamped with their choices, paid for with our money. I stood in the bedroom, staring at the ugly floral curtains Linda had hung over my plain ones, and something snapped. For months of holding it in, her arrogance, her stubbornness, Ray's mess, my husband's silence, it all came crashing down. I didn't care about keeping the peace anymore. I walked back to the living room where they were all sitting, Linda still going on about how great the house looked now. I cut her off. I told her to pack her things and get out. No yelling, just flat and clear. Ray looked up from the TV, surprised, and my husband's head jerked toward me. Linda didn't move. She crossed her arms and said they weren't going anywhere, that they'd improved the place and deserved to stay. That arrogance again, like she owned it all. I didn't argue with her. I turned to my husband and said his parents had to leave, or I would. He started to say something, probably to calm things down, but I didn't let him. I pointed out the credit card charges, the ruined carpet, the fact that they turned our home into their project without asking. I said I was done being ignored in my own house. Ray got up, grumbling about how ungrateful I was, and Linda doubled down, insisting they'd stay because my husband wanted them there. That's when he finally spoke. He told them they'd crossed the line using our money and changing everything. But then he hesitated, looking between me and his parents, and said maybe we could work it out. Work it out? After all this? I grabbed my keys and walked out. I didn't know where I was going, just drove to a friend's place and crashed on her couch. I needed space to think. My phone buzzed all night. Texts from my husband, first asking me to come back, then saying his parents would leave if it meant that much to me. Linda sent one too, calling me selfish and dramatic. I didn't reply. I sat there in the dark, realizing this wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about respect, and I hadn't had any in months. By morning, I knew I couldn't go back until they were gone for good. I stayed at my friend's place for 2 days. She didn't ask too many questions, just let me sleep on her couch and vent when I needed to. My husband kept texting, saying he'd talked to his parents, and they were packing up. He said he didn't realize how bad it had gotten, that he should have listened to me sooner. I didn't respond right away. I was still angry, not just at Linda and Ray, but at him for letting it go this far. The house wasn't the only thing they'd messed up. Our marriage felt broken too. On the 3rd day, he called. He said Linda and Ray were gone, moved out to a cheap rental they'd found with some help from his sister. He sounded tired, not defensive like before. He asked me to come home. I didn't say yes or no, just hung up and sat there thinking. Part of me wanted to stay away longer, to make him feel what I'd felt for months. But I also wanted my house back, my life back. I drove home that afternoon, not sure what I'd find. The house was quiet when I walked in. The red door was still there, the yellow walls too, but Linda's quilts and Ray's tools were gone. The kitchen smelled normal again, not like burnt onions. My husband was in the living room, sitting on the couch, looking at the new flooring like he didn't know what to say. He stood up when he saw me and started apologizing. He said he'd been wrong to invite them without asking, wrong to let them take over. He admitted Linda's arrogance had blinded him, and he hadn't wanted to see it. I didn't forgive him right away. I told him how much it hurt that he'd picked them over me, that he'd let them spend our money and change our home. He nodded, didn't argue, just listened. It was the first time in months he'd really heard me. We didn't fix everything that day. I slept in the spare room that night, needing space to process. But he was there, and they weren't. That was a start. A week passed after I came back home. The house was ours again, but it didn't feel the same. The red door, the yellow walls, the laminate flooring, they were constant reminders of what happened. My husband tried to make it right. He painted the door back to blue one weekend, and we started saving up to replace the flooring. The walls stayed yellow. I didn't have the energy to care about them anymore. We worked on the house together, slowly undoing what Linda and Ray had forced on us. It wasn't just about the paint or the carpet, it was about taking it back. Things with my husband weren't perfect. We talked more than we had in months, but it was awkward at first. He kept apologizing, and I kept waiting for the resentment to fade. It did, little by little. He stopped defending his parents when their names came up, and I stopped shutting him out. We set rules: no more big decisions without both of us agreeing, no more family moving in without a real plan. He stuck to it. Linda called him a few times, complaining about their new place, but he didn't invite her back. That meant something. I never spoke to Linda or Ray again. They didn't reach out to me after that last text, and I didn't care to fix things with them. They never liked me, and I was done pretending it could change. My husband saw them sometimes, meeting them outside the house, but he didn't push me to join. I think he finally understood how deep the damage went. The credit card bill got paid off over a few months, and we locked it away after that. No more emergencies unless we both signed off. 6 months later, the house felt like home again. Not the same as before, but close enough. My books were back on the shelves, my mugs in the cabinet. The spare room stayed empty, a quiet space I could use when I needed it. My husband and I weren't fully healed, but we were steady. The whole mess with his parents showed us where we'd cracked, and where we could still hold together. It wasn't a happy ending, not really, but it was ours.